Hi everyone, it's Yvette Blowitz from spiritgirl.com and welcome to Feel Good from Within. I'm super excited to be here with you today and with our very special guest, Lissy Abrahams, who is a leading individual and couple psychotherapist. She is the author of Relationship Reset, How to Break the Cycle of Conflict and Create Secure and Lasting Love. She's also an expert and featured regularly on TV and podcast shows and sites. And she has founded the Sydney-based therapy clinic Heath Group Practice. We're here today to find out more about relationships and why do we fight most with those we love. Lissy Abrahams, welcome to Feel Good from Within. How are you today?
I'm awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Yvette. It's really exciting to be here and join you today.
I'm so grateful, and I'm super grateful our audience is joining us from right around the world to learn more about your book, Relationship Reset, and more about the work that you do. Before we dive into your book, can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
So I'm an individual and couple psychotherapist. I trained in London and I studied a master's in couple psychotherapy, which was a 4-year one. When I returned to Sydney 11 years ago, I trained as a mediator, so I can help couples who are separating. I don't typically work as a mediator at the moment, but I do help people in my practice with some of the tools. I created a clinic in Sydney, and that's been fantastic in helping hundreds and hundreds of people each week, help them and their families in times of need. And I wrote a book recently, as you've mentioned, and that was a real joy, to be honest. Relationship Reset. I was in COVID like everybody last year. I'm in Sydney. I'm Sydney based, so that we were in lockdown. I had been really quite concerned about what was happening for a lot of couples during all of the restrictions and the lockdowns, especially because one of the things is if you've got a happy relationship, there's no problem. A lockdown's a joy and you get more time together. There might be some concerns financially, but in other ways it's wonderful and more time with the kids. But any cracks that were there prior to COVID, it's like pouring cement on them and then making it even worse because everybody was just in a kind of hothouse together. And we know that parents were doing all of the homeschooling and stuff as well. So there were enormous pressures on couples. I felt this pull that it was time to write about what I do in my consulting room. So that's what I did. So within a year, I contacted a publisher. They commissioned me to write the book. And then a year later, I was holding it. So it's been an incredible journey and it's already helping people, which is amazing, which is what I wanted.
I absolutely loved your book, Relationship Reset. I saw it in VW and I thought to myself, relationships, when it comes to mental health, children being raised in conflict isn't good for their mental health. What inspired you to want to call it Relationship Reset?
To be honest, it was also the publishers who came up with the name. So I'm not going to take credit for the name. I'll take credit for the content. So many couples spend so much time trying to make their relationships better. I don't know about you, but I have spent so long in my different relationships working on them, thinking about them. If things aren't working, I want to fix it. If we don't know what we're doing, we're just actually reinforcing this sense that our partner isn't right for us, or that they're a threat to us, or why they're not good enough. We might become critical, or we might become criticized. And over time, what happens is one's home stops being a haven. And when that happens, we're starting to get into a lot of the threat responses. When we're talking about a reset, it's how do we stop seeing our partner as a threat because we are reacting to them as if they're an actual threat. Having the tools to do that. We are not born knowing how to do this. They don't teach it in schools. Unless we happen to stumble upon the right information, we've got no idea. And it doesn't mean people aren't trying, because a lot of people do try really hard. And I don't know if you know this, but people take up to 6 years before they even contact a couples therapist. And that's a really long time. I mean, 6 years of sitting in distress, overwhelm, anxiety, sadness, loneliness. Kids might be listening to conflict, experiencing conflict yourself, all of the recovery from conflict. So all of that is just anxiety provoking to the max, and our whole nervous systems become quite reactive to each other. So the reset is, how do we calm this whole situation down and calm our minds and bodies down.
And I have to say, by reading your book, I did wish they taught this at school, because I had no idea that there are all these different attachment styles, and that when you are with a partner, whether you're dating or married, the way you got raised as a child can mean that you both have different attachment styles. But if you don't know what your style is, you can't change it. So you could be
Absolutely.
reactive. Can you share a bit more about that? How our childhood experiences really shape who we are as an adult? And it's only through your book that we can actually discover what kind of attachment style we actually have if we haven't gone to therapy.
So pleased you can see that connection, because that's why I wrote it, because we don't know what we don't know. With the attachment styles, it's really a way of understanding initially how a child bonds to their parents. It's not how the parent bonds to the child. It's how a child perceives their parent, not based on one experience, but based on thousands and thousands of experiences, which we call micro experiences. They can be very small experiences of, have they had enough of their parents' presence? Have they been attended to in a timely enough manner? When they cry out, does the parent come to them in a timely manner? Now, I'm not saying this to freak everyone out and panic them about how quickly they need to reply, but we need to do this timely enough so that the infant and then the child, as they get a bit older, don't start becoming distressed that they can't call their parent in. You know, those initial cries, they're just communication. Hey, I'm wet, or hey, I'm hungry, or my nappy needs changing, I'm uncomfortable. But if we leave it too long, those cries become distress. And we know that. We all hate that sound of a child screaming in distress. But they do that because their first initial cries weren't heard and answered. So they have to escalate. The thing is, attachment links to this, because for a child who's been responded to in a timely enough manner over those thousands and thousands of micro moments, they're going to end up feeling quite secure with their parents. They can rely on them. They trust them. They know that their parents can apologize if they get out of line with them. You know, sometimes parents can be a bit heavy-handed. So there's enough trust in the system. For children who haven't had enough trust and that sort of reliable parenting, there's three very typical responses. And they're all a version where we've been altered off our course of security. We're no longer so secure. So we become anxious. So some people become very, very clingy. And in the book, I refer to these as the tape measures. They're always looking to see, where's mum and dad, mum or dad, mum or dad. And it's like they've got these retractable tape measures in their back pocket. And then they are looking to find out, are they too far away from me? So they end up, when they get their parents, they cling on to them for dear life all the time. They don't want to be put down, or they whinge at the feet because they just want to be with them to feel secure, because they don't. Then there are the other kids who that doesn't work for them. They've tried that usually, and then they give up, because they're still not getting their needs responded to enough. And they're the ones in the book that I call the fortress. They're no longer preoccupied. It's like they turn off the preoccupation. They've gone a step further and they realize that they've got to do it for themselves. So they go into what I call a fortress for one, that they're not using their parents or their presence anymore. They're having to kind of look after it all inside of themselves, all of their upset feelings. No one's going to help me with these. I'll just turn it off. So they deactivate their calling to their parents. So this is how the child bonds with the parent. And then there are other children who have been really quite traumatized even more, and they don't know how to bond with their parents, and they don't really trust them because they might have been frightening, abusive, they might not be available for them mentally, so they just don't feel safe with them. So these children, when they're upset, they don't tend to go to their parents in that way that, say, the clingy ones did, or just turn it off. They can do a mixture of it, but then they can do these other behaviours, which might be rocking backwards and forwards or having quite dazed expressions. They don't know how to connect with them because they've never had that experience feeling secure enough in a repeated kind of way. So attachment theory explains how we were wired up in childhood and how we continue to treat our partner in the future like this. Like it's all a wiring and mapping onto our partner as an adult. It's a really important way of understanding how are we wired, so we can understand what are we like in a relationship.
And so, as an example, if someone has that fortress where they go inward, they might have had an argument. We've got two people, and one is used to talking to the other and reassuring and communicating because they might have had that upbringing, that attachment style, secure. But the other one goes inwards. You can't help me. We're not talking about it. I'm not dealing with it. I'm going inwards. I don't need any help. Can this then create conflict because then the other person gets upset that he won't or she won't talk about it with them, and then they feel like they can't communicate properly, but it comes back to attachment styles?
Typically, a secure partner will kind of understand. It won't cause too much conflict because a secure partner will think, oh, they just need some time to process this. I'll give them some time and then they'll come back and we might try and talk about it when they're upset. A secure person can kind of see a bigger picture and they have this sort of belief that the world will be okay. They're quite resilient. So they're not going to be as bothered as, say, someone who's had trauma when their partner goes into the fortress, or if you're a clingy partner. These are the ones, the other sort of more insecurely, who are going to have feelings and reactions to a partner going into the fortress. So the most conflictual types are the ones with a fortress and a tape measure. The ones who are measuring all the time and the fortress, they're the most conflictual because they're so different in their way of dealing with upset feelings.
And what do you do when someone comes in and they say, I feel insecure? And then the other partner is like, well, I don't. Everything's fine. I thought we had a good relationship.
Well, it's an interesting one. Is the person insecure because there's actually an insecurity in the relationship? So I usually say, if there's one person feeling it, something's going on. So the other person who's saying they're so secure and everything's great, maybe they're missing something, or maybe they're denying something, which could be a defense mechanism. So they might be just trying to calm it all down with a kind of broad brush sweep of everything's fine, but it might not be. So for me, I'd really want to be understanding, well, what's that or insecurely attached person saying? Maybe there's something about this sweeping over it that doesn't work for them and doesn't feel like they get that need attended to. So it doesn't mean that they're always off kilter. Might be detecting something very real that's going on.
You shared some very confronting figures about the divorce rates in Australia.
Yeah, it's 1 in 3 in Australia. But what we also know is in the UK and the USA, it's 1 in 2 marriages end in divorce. But as a couples therapist, I'm also an individual therapist, but I can speak from my experience, even though people may not divorce, it doesn't mean they're happy. So I've met many, many couples who come to see me and they're on the brink of divorce, and they then do the work and they can retain their relationship and create a really good one over time. But the thing is, not everybody who divorces is in the statistic, because there's so many couples who stay together who are miserable. They might not be talking. They might not have had a sexual relationship, which makes them unhappy for about 10 years, you know. So all sorts of things can go on that the divorce rate doesn't speak to. And I get to see how much goes on behind closed doors and just how much pain and suffering is going on, because we don't know about it, attachment styles. We don't know what we don't know. And we don't know how we then map all of that childhood wiring onto our relationships and then how to look at ourselves and change it. It's not possible. So what we do is, with our partner, if we don't feel good, we think it's them. We want to blame them because they've altered our mood. We were fine before they said something. We were absolutely fine. You've upset me now, but they've just put a mirror up and triggered something in us that's actually originated from earlier days and might make us feel like we're going back to the fortress or the tape measure or to trauma. It's really complex. And that's why I wanted everyone to know about it.
That's why I love your book, though, because it's really providing education in such a way that I could get, and I think anyone who reads the book could get. And I felt like it provides a lot of hope in terms of if you can try and figure out what's going on within and your pattern of style, then you can actually work on it. So instead of being reactive and trying to blame the other person for how you're feeling, it's like, hang on a minute, what I discovered is this is going on within me. It's not even going on within them. And that was really exciting to discover. You mentioned that we have serious blind spots in relationships. What are these and how do they affect our relationship?
That's a great question. We have several blind spots, but the first one we have is that if we don't understand our attachment style, which we talked about, we won't understand how we're wired up. This is called a relational template, and it's like a program about how we operate. That's very conscious and unconscious, that material. We don't know what we don't know, as I said before, but that template holds all our expectations about relationships, beliefs, our opinions, our values, and without knowing what these are, and how we're wired up, we're going to have serious problems typically if we're not secure. That would be the first one to really talk about. The second one would be that we all have different levels of distress tolerance or intolerance. And what this means is when our partner presents something that we don't like, that doesn't sit with our relationship template, our program of how we want to relate, we can get pretty upset. And what that means is we have distress intolerance. We can't cope with it. And that means we might then go into flight or fight mode and start reacting. So that means we've been triggered. So distress intolerance, the fact that we don't know that we can't cope and we start blaming them for upsetting us or whatever it is, it's because we can't cope. A blind spot is if we could increase our window of tolerance for distress, we could just come on in leaps and bounds and not be so triggered by our partner. So that's a huge one. Then I'd say really there was another one, which is other triggers. We don't know what triggers us to get all upset. So it could be our partner's voice might get really soft, or they might raise an eyebrow, or they might look at us in a disapproving way. And we can just fly off the handle, be a little firecracker, whatever it is. But we don't really know why it's that trigger that's upset us. But it's often linked to something that's in that relational template. So these are all our blind spots. They're all interconnected. The last one I'd really say about blind spots is we've got these ego defense mechanisms. And when we're triggered, what do? Do we start avoiding things? Do we go into denial? So we talked about denial before. Do we use repression? Do we just like stuff it down as if this stuff doesn't exist inside of us? Do we use regression? That's an ego defense mechanism. And that's something like tantruming, crying, screaming, shouting, curling up in the fetal position, whinging, complaining. These are all part of regression. It's what little kids do. So we do those as adults too. That's just some examples, but we need to know what do we do. They're often very unconscious, but where do we go once we've been triggered? And there's a whole host of ego defense mechanisms. Once we know, we can then alter it, but we can't change what we don't know.
And then how do these blind spots impact our relationships?
As I was saying before, we'll get triggered by our partner. We don't think it's about us. We think it's them. How could you call me lazy? As if that's the worst thing we can be called in the world. Our ego doesn't like to be called that. Doesn't like to be called selfish either. So we become very, very reactive, but we've got no understanding why we're so reactive. And if I were to say to you, Yvette, you are lazy, you're not going to take it from me like today, like it's the worst thing you could hear. But if your partner says it, it's like, oh, don't see me like that. That's not kind. I'm not like that. With certain people, these things matter more than with other people. But typically, if it comes out in our relationship, we can get pretty annoyed, pretty sad, and then we'll do something with it like I described before.
What can we do if we want to improve our relationship and stop our blind spots taking over? Apart from reading relationship research.
We need to really understand our internal narrative. If our ego is going on and on about why our partner is so bad, why we're a victim of them, and I'm not talking about domestic violence or abuse here, quite separate. We need to understand that, because otherwise, if we don't, our behaviour is going to change towards our partner. If we need help to understand that, we can go and get some therapy, or we can read a book like Relationship Reset, or listen to podcasts like yours, anything that's going to help us understand why we do what we do. So we need to understand our triggers, and doing things like mindfulness, breath work, anything like that, breathing exercises, anything that brings us back to the present is really helpful.
So trying to build our capability to deal with more stress if we don't have that resilience within the relationship.
Exactly right. Yeah, we want to build that resilience, because like the children in childhood who were secure, they got that when they were young. We can give that to ourselves, and we can develop earned secure attachment. We can become it when we earn it, if we're not born with it or getting it in childhood. So that's exactly right. We can get there just by doing some work around it.
You had so many stories in your book. There was an example where there was a couple and the wife wasn't happy with her husband's drinking. And I thought this is a typical Aussie story, because Australians were renowned for being the biggest drinkers, or coming home and having a few beers after work and relaxing, and it's how they relax. If they were raised, say, in a home, the alcohol wasn't a pleasant thing, can that trigger that partner to not like the other partner drinking?
Absolutely. So either two things can really go on there. So the first is that they could either become a heavy drinker themselves, because it's been modeled to them. And this is how you deal with life. This is how you deal with distress. This is how you wind down in the evening after a stressful day. So alcohol becomes that tool that's been modeled. The other is that it could become an issue with one's partner if every time they have their first drink, their second drink, the next drink after that, going out for dinner, all of these kind of comments of, oh, you're not going to drink tonight, are you? Or watch it, will you? They're just like poking an angry bear because nobody wants to be controlled. Now, that doesn't mean the partner's got necessarily a drinking problem, but they may. So it's hard to know in that situation if the partner's really a big drinker or not, or just whether the partner who's grown up with it is just very, very sensitive to it. But I can guarantee it's going to be an issue. It really will, because they're going to be sensitive. There's been a lack of safety around it in childhood. So you're going to be on high alert. I look at it like people have little radars and antennas that go up. They're looking for evidence because they want to be safe. We all just want to be safe at the end of the day.
You mentioned earlier that it takes about 6 years for even a couple to come to therapy. Do you think some people go, oh, I don't want to talk to anyone about this. No, we've got a problem.
Yeah, that's the fortress. The fortress don't want to come to therapy. They would rather be anywhere else than talking. They go into their fortress to work everything out for themselves. They don't want to come to therapy. It's really hard for them. They're not used to someone wanting to know what's in their mind. It feels really intrusive. It feels like they're being sort of grabbed at information that they don't want to give or think about out loud, or it could be quite shameful. They're not used to it. So in a partnership, to have two people say yes is a great thing because it can be really exposing. I often say to my couples when I meet them that couple work is for the brave because there's nowhere to hide. If you go into individual therapy, you can choose where you want to take the therapy that day. But when you've got a partner in the room and you've just had a blazing row or you've done something, it can be really exposing. There's nowhere to hide. There's also great joys in the room. Therapy can be fantastic with couples and we have a lot of fun, but it's serious.
What would be the impact, say, live in separate rooms? Would the child be learning from that?
I mean, it depends what the kids have been told. Assuming they haven't been told anything, that's going to be their model of how to have a relationship where people are quite separate. They don't come to each other. They don't comfort each other. If it's acrimonious and there's fighting and stuff, that would be very difficult. So the children are just absorbing all the messages. These are those thousands of micro messages about relating. This is how you do it. Now, the parents might be very different with their own children and how they treat them. So that might be that they're getting other micro moments that are really nice with the kids, but it would be a confusing scene, especially if they go to other people's houses. But I do think a lot of people live like that because they actually can't afford to separate. The quality of life would go down so much. And it's a pretty scary thing if you don't have enough money to look after your individual unit. So I do understand why parents would set that up. The one thing I would say is to probably let the children know so that they're not having to join the dots that this is a normal relationship, that they understand. And I do it nicely and together and say, look, mummy and daddy, whoever it is, are separating, but we're going to live together. And just, we can still do some things together where it's meals or whatever. But I'd want them to know because children are going to join the dots with the capacity of their young minds. And we can influence how they join those dots and take them away from confused states. The more confused they are, the more of their resources are spent thinking about it. And that then takes up their ability to go to school and think. You just want to make life easier for a kid. So they can get used to unusual situations if they understand it. But if they don't, it's not going to be great.
If they are living in separate rooms, but they haven't had any relationship counselling or therapy, there's obviously still opportunity there to work things out. If they're with someone who's qualified and knows about relationships, wouldn't you think?
If they want to. It all comes down to the motivation. If they feel that there's enough that holds them together to try, then they'll come through the door. For me, I get people working at their best when they've got the most to lose. When they're faced with that moment of, oh my goodness, I could lose everything here, that's when people come to see me and they're quite committed to the process because they don't want to lose their family. They don't want to blow this whole gig up. We can work through pretty tough things. We can work through affairs, addictions. There's a lot we can work through, but you have to want to save the family or the couple relationship first.
Yes, and I can see why people are living under the same roof separated because we've got a housing crisis and the cost of living. I could talk to you forever about your book. I really learned so much. Now, you're giving so much of your time helping others. What are some of your own self-care rituals, and how do you look after your own self?
I'm quite careful. As I get older, I've made the connection more and more about self-care that I can't really take shortcuts. I just have to stick with it. I love getting out in just my local parks in Sydney and taking my dogs for a walk. In summer, I absolutely love being barefoot. So I'll be barefoot in the park. If there's any muddy patches, I'll walk through them because we've had a lot of rain. So I absolutely love just being barefoot and with my dogs. It's one of my favorite ones. And I also do like things like weight training and Pilates. They're not that exciting, but I do them just to look after myself and eat well. Yeah.
That's so good. What would a couple of relationship tips be? How could they try to create a healthy relationship?
Just by knowledge, just to get some knowledge and to be able to really understand that relational template. I've got resources online. I've got some free resources online. I've also got a course. Have a look. There's lots of blogs I've written with information in that as well. It's just really important to join yourself up. If we don't know that we're unconsciously responding to things that frighten us or we perceive them as frightening, we're just going to be triggered all over the place. So if a couple's interested, grab a copy of the book. It's a small investment in yourself, and a lot of GPs are recommending it now. Family lawyers are recommending it. They're not trying to go out of business though. Psychiatrists, because it's actually really huge for mental health to understand what's inside. Really, it's just do the work. Get on with it. Get cracking. Don't live in distress. You don't have to live in distress states.
It doesn't matter then how many date nights we have a week if we still don't know our attachment style, relational template. What is your hope for your newfound book readers?
It's for my book readers, but it's just also for my purpose in life. My whole purpose is to ease suffering so that all creatures can thrive. And so that means humans. So that's why the book's out, the course is out. I do what I do. There's some stuff online as well, like free stuff online, so that all creatures can thrive. I'm also hugely into preventing animal cruelty. So that's why there's creatures in my purpose and part of my mission as well, because I want to help save animals on this planet. For me, it's all creatures. Anything with a heartbeat or a bit of blood going through the system, I want them to thrive. So it's not about survival. We want to look at thriving, and that takes some work for a lot of us. How to go from survival mode to thriving. You can do it.
That's such a beautiful hope. And how can we stay in touch with you after this podcast show?
I'm found on lissyabrahams.com, and anyone can contact me. Feel free to, lissy@lissyabrahams.com. I've got a newsletter if anyone wants to come and join the community. Always happy to meet new people, and anyone can feel free to make contact, and it'd be just lovely to keep in contact with you, Yvette, as well.
Thank you so much again, Lissy Abrahams. So grateful. We got to celebrate your book, Relationship Reset. It must be so exciting. I picked my copy up from Big W, which I love, and the cover's gorgeous. I learned so much, and I just want to thank you for actually writing this book. I haven't seen a book like this in my time, especially not in Australia. I've never picked up a book as such. So thank you so, so much. Getting a goosebump moment.
Thank you. That means so much.
Thank you so much, because I really loved it. There are all of these areas where you can fill out, you ask questions. So it is a workbook as well.
Yeah, it is as well. Absolutely. It's an individual's journey into how they relate. It's not how to fix your partner. It's how do you look inside yourself to see how you relate to your partner and why you do.
See you, Lissy. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening into this week's Feel Good From Within Spirit Girl podcast episode. I hope you found this conversation of interest and benefit to you. In support, I would love for you to subscribe to Feel Good From Within with Yvette Blowitz Spirit Girl podcast. And if you feel like going above and beyond and you really love the podcast show, I would love for you to leave a 5-star rating and review as a little random act of kindness too. And to share this show with your family, friends and community. Be sure to subscribe to my mailing list at spiritgirl.com or feelgoodfromwithin.com or YvetteLeeBlowitz.com, and to follow Spirit Girl, Yvette Lee Blowitz, or Feel Good From Within on any social media app. And together, let's feel good from within.